Well, this is a challenge for all social media platforms. Reddit, and I'm on the board today, but our general manager, Eric Martin, gave what I thought was a very sincere and very sound apology.
Brandy Worley shocked her family and her neighbors by to death her 2 young kids. Today was another tough day for the people of Darlington.
We do not have a suspect at this time, and that individual is still out there.
"30 entries, 7 levels. This is an iceberg of some of the most disturbing posts found on Reddit. We're starting off with the strange but still relatively tame encounters before diving deep into the absolutely unhinged stories lurking on the platform. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. The Lamp Story. A few years ago, a Reddit story went viral that, to this day, it's still popping up in memes. You've probably seen some of them. A man sitting in a cozy, brightly lit living room staring at a lamp that seems off. It's a normal lamp, sure, but something about it just doesn't feel right. While the memes are weird and hilarious, the actual story behind them is wild. It all started with a now-deleted Reddit user named Temptotasun, who posted about a bizarre, life-altering experience. The story begins with OP, a college student, having a run-in with a massive football player. After a brief confrontation over OP walking on the road, the player knocks him out, leaving him unconscious for a few minutes. And here's where things get crazy. In those few unconscious minutes, OP claims he lived 10 years of his future life. In this future life, he met a woman he fell head over heels for and spent years pursuing her. Eventually, she reciprocated, they got married, and soon after had a daughter. Life was perfect, like sitcom-level perfect. Later, they had a son, and for years, everything was blissfully normal. But then, one day, while chilling on the couch, OP noticed something off about the lamp in his living room. He described it as weirdly inverted and distorted, almost like it didn't belong. The more he fixated on it, the more uneasy he felt, until it hit him like a ton of bricks. This reality he was living in wasn't real. Turns out those 10 years of life were just an elaborate construct of his brain dreamed up in the seconds after he got knocked out. The wife, the kids, the cozy life, they weren't real. With this realization, OP woke up to find himself being rushed to the hospital by a cop lying in the same place where he'd been knocked out. The experience naturally left him shaken for years. He spiraled into depression and mourned the loss of a family that never even existed. Wild, but also kind of terrifying when you think about what the human brain is capable of. OP ended his post with this haunting note. "I was grieving the loss of my wife and children and dealing with the knowledge that they never existed. I was scared that I was going insane as I would cry myself to sleep, hoping I would see her in my dreams. I never have, but sometimes I see my son, usually just a glimpse out of my peripheral vision. He is perpetually 5 years old, and I can never hear what he says." Imagine grieving the loss of someone who is never even real. That's some next-level mind manipulation. Fake emergency. Car hijackers and robbers always seem to come up with the most unhinged ways to trap their victims in the middle of nowhere. But this one Reddit post by user Echo5Juliet easily takes the cake for being one of the most deranged ambush setups ever. Echo5Juliet starts by describing the exact area he was driving through. He was on a route from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico, taking an abandoned shortcut that passed through a deserted community called Amboy. The town was completely dead, so desolate in fact that one side of the road was bordered by a massive lava field, and the other side by a salt plain. You can almost feel how dry, creepy, and isolated that drive must have been. He mentioned it was broad daylight, not even nighttime, and stopped briefly in the ghost town to snap a picture. Apparently, the place has a reputation for creepy rumors, with people saying it used to be a hotspot for satanic activity. After getting his picture, he got back in the car and continued his journey on the I-40. Soon, the lava fields and salt plains gave way to tall grass that completely covered both sides of the road. He was driving through this creepy mountain range when he had one of the most unnerving experiences of his life. The narrow road ahead was completely blocked by a red Pontiac Fiero. As if that wasn't sketchy enough, the car had its trunk open with clothes scattered all over the road. And then there were the bodies. Yep, 2 bodies, a man and a woman lying face down right in the middle of the road. Opie stopped about 100 feet away from the scene, took out his gun, and immediately felt something was off. The whole thing felt way too perfectly staged to be a real accident. Trusting his gut, he decided not to stick around. He found a small gap between one of the bodies and the car and carefully drove past. He was so shaken up by the whole thing that he had to stop a little further down the road to catch his breath. That's when his worst fears came true in his rearview mirror. The 2 bodies suddenly got up on their knees, and out of nowhere, around 20 people emerged from the tall grass on both sides of the road. Realizing it wasn't a coincidence, OP floored it and got out of there as fast as he could. He ended his post by saying, "Sometimes real life can be scarier than a movie." He's absolutely right about that. Late night recordings. As scary as it is, having a strange encounter with real people is still somehow less unnerving than having one with unknown and inexplicable forces. Red Wants Blue 80 is a Reddit user who shared a spine-chilling recording back in 2014, accompanied by an even more horrifying story behind it. She set up the scene by telling other users that she had been using a sleeping app to track her sleeping patterns for a few months. The way this app worked was it would track its users' sleeping patterns and voice record them throughout the night to basically document any possible disturbances that might cause a bad sleep quality. OP would just leave her phone on the bedside table and let the app do its thing. That is, until one seemingly normal night when she followed her usual routine and ended up finding something really disturbing in the app's recording history. On December 30th, 2014, OP was home alone with her toddler and the 2 were sleeping as usual. However, around 2 a.m., her sleep app captured something deeply unsettling. A recording of her actively talking to someone in the middle of the night. The conversation went something like this.
What are you doing? Okay.
The recording started off with strange clicking sounds that grew louder by the second. Then OP's voice is heard asking, "What are you doing?" A deep, manly voice responds with a chilling, "Nothing," followed by the clicking sounds intensifying. The clip ends with the other voice saying either, "That's them," "I'm Danny," or "Help me." Whichever it was, none of the options make this experience any less terrifying. In an update, OP revealed that a professional audio analyst helped examine the recording. They confirmed the second voice wasn't hers. It was far too deep, even for a man. It clearly wasn't her 3-year-old son either. This story sparked countless theories online. Some believed it was supernatural, while others think it might have been an attempted robbery. Few even speculated there could have been 2 intruders in the house for reasons no one wants to imagine. Whatever the case, the incident left OP understandably shaken. And while she claims there were no other incidents, she did eventually end up moving out of the house. Vacation horror. On a Reddit thread asking users to share their scariest and most disturbing true stories, one post stood out and caught internet-wide attention. The story was shared by Reddit user Yeah Not Quite, who recalled a river canoe trip they took in Venezuela back in 1998. Their group was made up of friends aged 18 to 22, and the plan was to complete a 5-day trip that would end on a high note. The group was accompanied by 2 tourists. One of them was an older German man, and the other was a local Orinoco man. OP recalls that the only odd thing about the 2 guides was the fact that they barely interacted with the group, which, honestly, at the time was not so weird as to spark any suspicions from them. One of the members of the group was a German girl who refused to disclose the fact that she could speak German simply because she didn't want the 2 guys to talk to her. However, things took a very dark turn 3 days into their trip. That evening, the two guides seemed more distant from the group than usual and were engaged in an intense, hushed argument after dinner. They were speaking a mix of German and a local language, but the German girl could understand enough to realize what was going on, and it absolutely terrified her. She pulled the group aside and told them what she had overheard. The guides weren't guides at all. They were actually human traffickers posing as professionals. According to her, the men were planning to kill the guys in the group and take the women away for who knows what horrific purpose. Confronting them wasn't an option considering how isolated they were, so the group decided to play it cool, go along with the plan, and wait for a chance to escape. They agreed to make a scene if they came across another canoe group the next day. Thankfully, luck was on their side. The following day, they spotted another group of tourists and started screaming for help. Their cries caught attention and they were eventually rescued. The fake guides tried to flee, but not before one of them whipped out a shotgun and threatened OP's group to keep quiet. Luckily, everyone made it out safely. When they reported the incident to the authorities, they were told the area was notorious for a particular serial killer targeting tourists. While the authorities couldn't confirm the guide's exact intentions, the experience was enough to haunt the group for life. Level 2. Disneyland Fiasco. On the same scariest, most disturbing stories thread on Reddit, another Reddit user by the name of Lay May Love came out with their own harrowing experience at Disney World. They were visiting Disney World with a friend and had to stop by the Ticket and Transportation Center to renew their park pass. Everything seemed normal, just a quick transaction, no big deal. But later that day, things took a seriously creepy turn. OP started getting texts from an unknown number. The text referred to her by name and even asked about the ugly guy she was with, like the person texting was actively watching them from somewhere. OP was understandably confused at first, but played along for a bit, replying politely and trying to figure out who this person was. The guy said his name was Steven, sent a photo of a WDW badge with his name on it, and casually wished her a good day at Magic Kingdom. This took the creep factor to an entirely new level because she hadn't told anyone she was going to Magic Kingdom. At this point, it was already super unsettling, but things got worse when the Steven guy texted her a screenshot of his Maps app. It clearly showed the route from wherever he was to OP's home address. That's when the panic really set in because almost nobody had that information. She lived with her family and didn't give out her address to anyone. Freaked out, OP and her friend immediately headed to Disney's guest services to report the incident. The last message Steven sent was, "LOL, don't get too creeped out. I promise I'm someone you already know." Turns out, Steven was the guy who printed OP's pass earlier in the day. In the short span of a few-minute transaction, he decided to grab her phone number and home address off the system. Thankfully, Disney didn't mess around. They fired him on the spot, and even a cop showed up to address the situation. While they said no crime had technically been committed, OP still filed a report because the man clearly had her home address. Later, a detective called to confirm she could press charges, which she did. The detective even hinted that Steven's creepy behavior probably wasn't a one-time thing, and that OP was likely the first person to put two and two together. While nothing ever came of the case, OP was able to track Steven down on Facebook thanks to his connected phone number. Even years later, she still gets chills rereading those messages, which she kept in case anything else ever happened. It's one of those stories that makes you rethink trusting even the most mundane situation. The Whistler. Some encounters are just too deliberate to be brushed off as a coincidence. Reddit user Bing Bong shared a bone-chilling experience in a creepiest thing that has ever actually happened to you thread that left users confused and justifiably scared. Bingby starts off his story by recalling his first ever run-in with the Whistler when he was just 8 years old. He said he was out for a walk with his mom in their neighborhood when they both heard the super strange whistling sound coming from a nearby swamp. According to OP, the sound was unmistakably human because of the way the pitch kept changing. It had that inconsistent rise and fall one would expect from a person, not a bird. He described it like this. It sounded sort of like a bird, but each whistle was different enough where the lack of consistency made it human-like. The whistle sounded higher then lower. I can't really describe it. At the time, they lived in Lansing, Michigan, in an area surrounded by woods and swamps. So naturally, OP's mom freaked out and rushed them both back home. For a while, they kind of forgot about the whole thing and moved on with their lives. But then, 2 years later, the exact same thing happened again. This time, OP was 10 and walking his dog near their house when he heard that exact same weird, inconsistent whistle. It was coming from this massive bush nearby, and of course, he was instantly reminded of the first encounter with the Whistler. He was terrified, but managed to get home safely. After that, nothing happened for a few years. Life went on, and OP pretty much let it fade into the back of his mind. But then, more than a decade later, when he was 24, he came face to face with whatever or whoever was behind it. Now here's the kicker. This happened in South Dakota, thousands of miles away from where the first two incidents occurred. OP and his girlfriend were on a beach watching fireworks. His girlfriend stepped away to grab something from the car, leaving him alone in the dark shoreline. That's when he noticed a silhouette of a man in a canoe about 20 meters off the shore. The second OP was alone, the man turned his boat towards him and started whistling. Exact same way OP had heard all those years ago. He described the moment like this. My entire body was frozen and covered in goosebumps. It was the exact same Whistler from my childhood more than a decade earlier. I looked at the figure, but it was much too dark to discern who it could be. OP tried calling out to the man, asking who he was, but instead of responding, the man just slowly paddled away, leaving him alone and absolutely horrified. When OP later asked his mom if she remembered anything about their encounter with the Whistler, she unfortunately didn't recall much, leaving the mystery totally unsolved. Post-it notes. This Reddit user shared an eerie and downright bizarre experience that happened in their home, only to have their life saved by the advice of another user. R. Bradbury posted their story on the legal advice subreddit, hoping to figure out how to catch their landlord sneaking into their apartment at night. They were convinced someone, maybe the landlord, was leaving cryptic post-it notes around their house, trying to mimic their handwriting. It all started in April 2015 when OP found a yellow post-it note on their desk. It reminded them of errands they supposedly had to run, but OP couldn't recall writing it. Thinking maybe they did it half asleep, they brushed it off, but things got weirder. More post-it notes started popping up, and they were getting stranger. One read, "Saved your documents." Another said something like, "Our landlord isn't letting me talk to you, but it's important we do." These notes gave OP a sinking feeling that someone had broken into their home. Some of the handwriting matched theirs, but some didn't, making the whole situation even creepier. Determined to catch whoever was behind this, OP set up multiple cameras around their apartment, but they didn't capture anything out of the ordinary. The only thing they noticed? Their recycle bin was mysteriously emptied the next day. This convinced OP that the intruder was deleting the footage. Naturally, they suspected their landlord and even compared their landlord's old documents to the post-it notes. To their shock, the handwriting seemed pretty similar. But without solid evidence, OP didn't know what to do. That's when they turned to Reddit for help, hoping someone would give them a lead. Little did they know, one comment would quite literally save their life. A user named Kakerlak suggested it might not be the landlord at all. They mentioned the possibility of an underlying mental issue like a dissociative disorder causing OP to forget writing the notes themselves. But they also floated another idea, potential carbon monoxide poisoning. Kakerlak explained how prolonged exposure to CO gas could cause symptoms like confusion, memory loss, and even hallucinations. They recommended OP test their apartment with a carbon monoxide detector immediately, That theory turned out to be spot on. OP plugged in a carbon monoxide detector in their bedroom and the reading shot up to 100 parts per million, a dangerously high level. Turns out, OP had been writing those notes during episodes of disorientation caused by carbon monoxide poisoning and completely forgetting about it afterward. Thanks to one thoughtful Reddit comment, OP avoided what could have been a very, very tragic outcome. They later updated their post saying, "Thanks to everyone who sent suggestions and gave advice on how to proceed, especially to those who recommended a carbon monoxide detector, because when I plugged one in the bedroom, it read at 100 parts per million." It's wild to think how a random internet stranger's advice ended up saving someone's life. The story is just one more reason to always take weird symptoms seriously, and maybe keep a carbon monoxide detector handy, just in case. Uninvited spectators. There's honestly nothing more disturbing than the thought of someone secretly watching you, especially in the one place you're supposed to feel safe. Reddit user SpookyMoo shared a harrowing experience they had with a neighbor when they caught the latter essentially spying on them in the bathroom. OP was living alone in a two-bedroom house in England, situated in the middle of a long strip of almost identical houses. All of these houses had their terraces and attics attached to each other once, but because of security reasons, they were blocked when OP had moved in. The first time they noticed something odd was when they were in the bath. They heard a strange noise coming from above, but assumed it was probably an animal sneaking around in the attic. They even had a friend check it out for them, and the friend reassured them there was nothing up there. So, OP let it go and moved on. For a few months, things were mostly fine. Sure, there were some occasional weird noises, but they only seemed to happen when OP was in the bathroom. Still, they didn't think much of it. Then, one night, things took a really terrifying turn. OP was getting ready to head out with some friends, but their dog wouldn't stop barking at the ceiling. OP decided not to risk staying in the house and went to a friend's place to get ready instead. The next day, OP ran into a neighbor they always avoided because of the creepy vibes. This neighbor had a habit of staring in a way that made OP super uncomfortable. But this time, he shouted after OP asking if they were okay. OP, trying to stay polite but also wanting to get away as quickly as possible, smiled and gave a polite response. That's when the neighbor said something that absolutely floored them. "Just as I got to my door, he asked if I got to my friends okay," OP wrote. At first, without thinking, I said yes, thank you, smiled and waved goodbye. When I got inside my house, I realized that he would not know I was at a friend's unless he heard me on the phone. That's when everything started to fall into place, and the horrifying realization sunk in. In a panic, OP called their family. After investigating further, they discovered something deeply alarming. The attic wall separating their house from the neighbors had been broken down. Not only that, but there were two gaping holes in the ceiling of OP's bathroom. They hadn't noticed them before because the attic was so dark. OP called the police, but they didn't get the resolution they were hoping for. The authorities refused to act, claiming there wasn't enough concrete evidence to prove the neighbor was spying. In the end, no action was taken against the neighbor. In the end, OP was left shaken and helpless. Their story ended on a chilling note. "I don't think I've ever been so disturbed knowing that the dirty pervert had been watching me for all that time. I never stayed in that house again. The whole ordeal is enough to make anyone paranoid. It's a stark reminder to trust your gut, double-check your living space, and always keep an eye out for any red flags." Level 3. You are not the father. In 2022, a panicked wife jumped onto Reddit for relationship advice after her husband of a few years accused her of infidelity. The wife was absolutely shocked by the accusation and swore that she had never even looked at another man while being with her husband. Unfortunately, the other side of the story didn't really help her case much. She started off her post on the subreddit r/relationship by telling users how much she loves her husband and that she'd never been with anyone else since they got together in college. I never cheated. I love my husband. We've been together since college, and he's the love of my life. He's handsome and kind." But the very next line completely changed the tone of her story for everyone. She added that there was absolutely no chance of anyone else being the father of their daughter, and expressed how upset she was that her husband had gone behind her back and taken a paternity test. Apparently, her husband had been suspicious for a while, all because their daughter's eyes were a completely different color. Both parents had blue eyes while their daughter had brown eyes. This fueled his doubts to cosmic levels, leading him to secretly take a paternity test. To everyone's shock, the results revealed that he was not the father. The wife, however, was fully convinced that the test was faulty and refused to believe it. And honestly, thank God for that, because when she confronted her husband and insisted on doing more tests together, something much stranger came to light. Neither of them was biologically related to the daughter they had been raising for years. This bombshell discovery turned their whole world upside down. In her update, the wife explained how police got involved to take their statements and how they are now suing the hospital where she gave birth. While she's relieved to have her husband's trust back, the situation is still incredibly overwhelming. She's terrified about her biological child's safety and feels crushed thinking about the mix-up. At the same time, she's scared of losing the daughter she's been raising and loves with all her heart. For now, both parents are trying to keep everything quiet to protect their daughter from public scrutiny, but are understandably confused about the situation. Once won't hurt. Possibly one of the most heartbreaking IAMA posts to ever surface on Reddit belonged to a man who shared the story of his first time trying. Spontaneous H gained quite the reputation back in 2009 when he posted on Reddit with the title, "I did yesterday. I am not a user and have never done anything besides pot back when I was a teen. AMA." And honestly, the entire post is as scary and real as it gets. The OP started by emphasizing that he was just a completely normal guy. He reassured readers that he wasn't a user apart from some casual drinking and a little pot smoking back in high school, nothing major. He doubled down on this by sharing that he was a 24-year-old with a master's degree and a steady full-time job. But as we all expected, things quickly took a darker turn. He explained how he had simply gone to a dealer to buy pot, but ended up being tempted into trying heroin for the first time. I've heard so much about it and how crazy addictive it is, and seen it in the movies and TV, and it really started to intrigue me. I've always wondered what it would be like to do heroin. Out of nowhere, I say, "I'll take the H," and we do the deal there. He took the home, snorted it, and described experiencing an indescribable euphoric bliss for hours. I waited, and in a few minutes I had the most pleasurable feeling of pure relaxation and bliss wash over me. I just sat there and everything felt amazing. I must have sat around for 4 hours doing nothing but feel total pleasure. He insisted to everyone in the post that this was just a one-time experiment and that he had no plans to try it again. But unfortunately, we all know how these stories go. An update 2 weeks later revealed the grim reality. OP had been using heroin consistently ever since that first time. He admitted to feeling the side effects and struggling with withdrawal symptoms whenever he tried to stop. It was clear his life was spiraling out of control. In one post, he even uploaded a picture of all his gear just to prove to trolls that he wasn't lying. Then, silence. No updates for a year. That is, until October 2010, when OP returned with a chilling post about overdosing. This incident became his wake-up call, pushing him to enter rehab, where he also discovered that underlying mental health issues had contributed to his addiction. 7 years later, in 2017, he posted one final update, this time with some good news. He proudly shared that he had been clean for 6 years and was finally rebuilding his life. There were certainly warning signs before with alcohol, weed, and other substances, although I probably couldn't admit it to myself at the time. I would have never tried it if things were truly going well for me. What followed in the later posts with where it took me was very real. Thanks to everyone who has reached out over the years. I hope everyone else here is able to find recovery and get the help they need. Spontaneous H's journey remains a lesson of how quickly things can spiral, but it also stands as a powerful reminder of the possibility of recovery, even after the darkest times. My mom poisoned me. My mother has poisoned me was an utterly unhinged post that appeared on Reddit in the Off My Chest subreddit in 2013. It was exactly what the title promised, and somehow even wilder than you'd expect. OP shared a deeply bizarre and unsettling story about his interactions with his mother and sister, which grew more violent over time. The whole thing kicked off when OP got a job as a line cook and moved out of the family home. For reasons no one could explain, this didn't sit well with his mother or sister. Instead of being happy for him, they started insulting and intimidating him, trying to get him to stay at home. Unfortunately, OP lost his job just a month later and had no choice but to move back in with his family. At first, things seemed to go back to normal. No hostility, no fights, just peace and quiet. But of course, it didn't last. Things escalated again when OP's mom found out he was applying for other jobs. Everything was cool at first, but as I was getting calls from recruiters and going to job interviews, they gradually became more hostile again, accusing me of being distant and not caring for them, OP shared. Not wanting to deal with the growing tension, OP took the first opportunity to leave. He landed a programming job in another city, but the move completely drained his finances. By the time he relocated, he was practically broke. Before he left, his mom gave him a bunch of styrofoam cup noodles, but they were oddly suspicious. The labels were torn off and the packages seemed tampered with. OP was wary and avoided eating them at first, but as his money ran out and his paycheck hadn't arrived yet, he eventually gave in. Almost instantly after eating the noodles, he felt terrible. I felt weak, lightheaded, and short of breath. I drank water to make me feel better, OP wrote. Over the week, my mom kept calling me, making sure to remind me to eat my ramen noodles. I was short on cash then, waiting for my first paycheck. His suspicion grew, especially since his sister had poisoned him before, and he decided to test the noodles for cyanide. The results came back positive. OP's worst fears were confirmed. He immediately contacted the police and cut off all contact with his family. The last update from him a year later was much more positive. He assured everyone that he was doing better than ever and had completely moved on from the ordeal. This post remains one of Reddit's most insane, with a story that feels straight out of a psychological thriller. Better Hoagie Down. Better Hoagie Down is a Reddit story that's both wild and weirdly eye-opening. It's a reminder about how important mental health checks are and how quickly things can spiral when there's no clear communication or someone to step in and help. The post, titled "It's Cold Out There, Better Hoagie Down," was shared back in 2016 by a guy who just wanted to rant about his wife's odd behavior. But the longer you read, the more things start to feel off. It was hard to tell if there was just a massive misunderstanding happening or if something way more serious was going on. OP started off by describing his wife's quirks. Apparently, she was a total prankster who loved pulling silly but harmless jokes on him every now and then. And since he considered himself pretty gullible, he often fell for them. Recently, though, he felt like her jokes had started crossing the line. Here's the setup. They were going through a bit of a rough patch when OP had to leave for a work meeting in another state. When he got back, his wife seemed distant and wasn't really giving him any attention. At first, he didn't think much of it. He had been sick a week before and maybe was simply cranky because of that. But then, according to him, she started playing these bizarre pranks on him, and things got weirder by the day. The so-called prank was, every morning she would silently hand him a brown bag lunch. No conversation, no eye contact, just the bag. Whenever she did that, she'd follow it up with an "It's cold out there, better hoagie down." At first, he didn't think too much of it, apart from being a little annoyed that she wasn't talking to him. But after a few days, he started feeling really anxious, like what was even going on? When he tried confronting her, she'd deny everything, act like nothing weird was happening. and even give him these looks as if he was the crazy one. He got so paranoid he even tried filming her as proof. But then, things took an even stranger turn. When he checked the footage, there was nothing useful, just random shots of floors and objects. He was completely losing it. Finally, he snapped and went to her parents, desperate to figure out what was happening. Turns out the explanation was not at all what he expected. OP realized he had been accidentally taking Seroquel, an antipsychotic medication, instead of his allergy meds. They're not entirely sure, he wrote, but at this point their best guess is the Seroquel either put me into some manic state or triggered some underlying schizophrenia / I don't know. So yeah, case in point, his wife wasn't pulling any elaborate pranks on him. Instead, he had an undiagnosed mental health condition that got triggered by the meds. And as for the hoagie down phrase, he had no idea why his brain decided to latch onto it. It's a story that starts as funny and absurd, but ends up being a pretty serious wake-up call about mental health and medication mix-ups. Hidden room behind hotel mirror. This unsettling post shared by Reddit user tbug411 is proof enough for people to thoroughly check their hotel rooms before settling in. It recounts OP's harrowing experience when she discovered an unknown woman standing in the middle of her hotel bathroom out of nowhere. The events unfold when OP and her coworkers return to their hotel after a long day at work. Everything seems normal at first until OP opens her hotel room door. She sees a woman in her bathroom holding OP's bag and clothes. At first, OP assumes it's just a cleaning lady, but as soon as she gets a closer look, she realizes her personal items are being handled by someone who shouldn't be there. Naturally, OP's first reaction is confusion and shock. She confronts the woman, who mumbles something to herself but is mostly unintelligible. OP's coworker is right behind her at this point, witnessing the whole bizarre interaction unfold. The woman drops the bags, scrambles with her purse, and tries to leave, even showing OP a plastic bag as if to prove she hasn't stolen anything. OP is too stunned to really process everything, but after a quick look around the room, it's clear that the entire place has been ransacked. Her electronics are untouched, but her bags have been gone through. Her clothes, underwear, and even her passport are stuffed into random bags as if someone was in a hurry to cover up their mess. The only thing stolen, according to OP, is her medication. Later, when OP and her coworkers head back to the lobby to report the incident, things take an even weirder turn. OP notices bits of drywall in the sink, and after further inspection, uncovers a hole behind her mirror, a crawl space big enough for a person to live in. It turns out the woman had been living behind the wall with access to OP's room and potentially others. The hotel had done renovations and hadn't properly sealed up the holes, which allowed the woman to come and go undetected. The revelation is chilling, and OP and her coworkers are left reeling from the discovery. Naturally, the bizarre and likely dangerous discovery forces OP and her coworkers to pack and move out instantly. All in all, the entire encounter is a terrifying reminder that sometimes reality is stranger and scarier than fiction. Kidnapped and kept for 3 years. User MagnetLink5824 shared a heartbreaking yet ultimately uplifting story about a traumatic experience she went through as a child. At just 8 years old, she was kidnapped by a man pretending to be her dad's friend and kept captive for 3 long years before finally escaping. OP recalls how the nightmare began. She was at school when a man approached her claiming to know her father. He strangely knew all these little details about OP's father and used that to lure her in, convincing her he was actually their close acquaintance. As any kid would, she got excited at the idea of seeing her dad again, especially since he'd been away on a business trip. She convinced her teachers she knew him and left with him to go see her dad at the airport. What followed was nothing short of a living nightmare. For 3 years, OP was held captive, forced to adapt and survive. As a terrified child, she had to learn how to protect herself, making the man believe she was trustworthy so he wouldn't hurt her. Over time, he started to trust her enough to let her out to cook or clean, which gave her the opening she needed. Her escape happened one day when he took her outside for some fresh air. She didn't think twice. She ran. She ran as fast and far as she could, eventually finding people who helped her get to safety. Thankfully, the story has a happy ending. OP was reunited with her family, and the man was eventually caught, though he took his own life before he could face justice. She wrapped up her post on a heartwarming note. Long story short, they caught him, he killed himself. I was back with my dad, my sisters, my dogs. I'm now happily married to my wife of 4 years, still undergoing therapy. Have a good job and a baby on the way. Ted Bundy interrupts date. Imagine sitting down on a normal day to watch TV only to realize that your parents' first date could have gone horribly wrong if fate hadn't stepped in. This story, shared by Reddit user R.W. Bingham, is about OP's friend recounting their parents' first date. It starts off like any sweet, awkward date. Dinner, conversation, and the usual nervous vibes. But what seemed like a cute little story quickly took a chilling turn. After their dinner date, OP's friend's dad thought it would be funny to take their mom to Provo Canyon for a late-night hike. Apparently, he knew the area well and had hiked there before pretty regularly and would essentially get brownie points if he managed to make it work. Things were going fine until both the people involved started to feel something was off. It was probably their intuition telling them to run far away. As they were getting increasingly apprehensive of the area, they were just going strong for the sake of it. That was until OP's friend's dad accidentally stepped on something soft on the ground. This shook him enough, and instead of sticking around to investigate, both of them rushed out of there, not wanting to run into the wrong crowd. That split-second decision probably saved their lives. Fast forward a few years, the couple is happily married, relaxing on the couch and watching TV, when they come across an interview with none other than Ted Bundy. During the interview, Bundy talked about how he had almost been caught once. He explained how he'd someone in Provo Canyon, but had to abandon the body in the open because he spotted some people approaching on the trail. OP's exact words? He explained how he hid in the trees just in time only to watch some guy walk right into the body, and for some reason he just turned around and walked away. It's a bone-chilling realization that their first date could have ended in absolute tragedy if they hadn't trusted their instincts and left when they did. Level 4. Limits of a mother's love. A parent's love for their child is unconditional, but sometimes circumstances push even the best parents to a breaking point. This heartbreaking Reddit post by a single mother of 2 reveals a raw and vulnerable side of parenthood. Overwhelmed by the challenges of raising a severely special needs child, she comes to terms with how much she has unintentionally neglected her older son. The post begins with her tragic backstory. She's a single mom of 2 boys who lost her husband 3 years ago in a workplace accident, or so she initially thought. She later came to fully believe that he had taken his own life because of being unable to cope with the immense stress of their situation. She revealed that her younger son had a rare genetic disorder that left him completely unresponsive and dependent on full-time care. He doesn't appear to have any awareness, or never has. His eyes are locked in one position, he doesn't respond to noise, touch, or pain. He is total care. He is capable of nothing. He's tube-fed and on oxygen. He's in diapers and will be forever. He makes no sounds, no attempts to communicate. He never even really cried as a baby. Despite everything, she clarified that she didn't resent her son for his condition. What she truly resented was how caring for him had consumed her entire life, leaving her older son emotionally neglected. This sudden realization came to her when she overheard her older child wishing his younger brother had never been born. That moment was a wake-up call. Realizing the damage her focus on the younger child has caused, she made the painful decision to place him into residential care. She now wanted to dedicate herself to her older son, the one she felt had been overlooked and emotionally scarred. Her post ended on a brutally honest and heart-wrenching note that captured the true depths of her pain and guilt. He's ruined my older son. I was so wrapped up in the younger, I never realized how ignored and damaged he was. He lost his father too. I didn't just lose my husband. He is my priority now, and this malignant lump can be someone else's problem. At least they'll be paid to care for him. At least they'll get a break from him when they punch out. I just want to never think of him again, and I'm not sorry. And for that, I'm sorry. The post is a stark reminder of how tough life can be and how even the most unconditional love has its breaking point. Intentionally infecting a baby. Mommy's boys and crazy mother-in-laws with a weird obsession with their sons have been a pretty hot topic on the internet for a fairly long time. However, this one post from a Reddit user on the subreddit r/relationships took the unhinged to another level. The post was shared by a 27-year-old woman with a toddler who was absolutely livid at what her mother-in-law had done. She explained that her husband and she had decided to spend the holidays at her husband's parents' place, which was about 12 hours away from their city. Since the distance was vast and the drive insanely long, they decided to go there a few weeks earlier to wind down and properly have their daughter reacquaint herself with her grandparents. But apparently, things were strange right from the get-go. According to OP, the mother-in-law was constantly butting into her business and making snide remarks about her parenting. There were occasional small arguments about different parenting techniques, but nothing too over the top. That was until one day OP came home to find her daughter sleeping on a strangely old-looking blanket. She didn't think much of it at first, but after a few days she was positive something was wrong with her daughter. The day after Christmas, Annie was really upsetted and wouldn't stop fidgeting and crying, she wrote. Naturally, OP panicked and started preparing to take her daughter to the doctor, but then her mother-in-law stepped in. She got a weird, smug smile on her face and told me there was nothing to worry about. When I asked her what she was talking about, she said without even looking at Annie that what she had was just chicken pox. I asked her how she could possibly know that, and she casually admitted one of her friend's grandkids had chicken pox a few weeks ago, and she asked them to wipe a blanket over the child's arms, legs, and face and bring it to her house. At this point, OP understandably lost it. The story escalated from there, but OP's detailed account left the internet unanimously siding with her, and with no sympathy for her mother-in-law's bizarre behavior. Things took a really bad turn when OP's husband not only decided to sit with his mother, but also actively demand OP apologize to her. This made OP rethink all her decisions. She ended the post by saying, "The fact that he cares more about Trish than his own daughter speaks volumes. When he eventually comes back, I think we'll have to have a serious talk about our future together." Close encounter with the clown. John Wayne Gacy was a serial killer who gained notoriety in 1970 around the Chicago area. He was found guilty of killing more than 30 people and was publicly labeled as the Killer Clown because of his past career as a clown performer. One Reddit story on a Creepiest Story thread chronicled the events of John Wayne Gacy almost getting his hands on one of the Redditor's uncles. The original post shared how the OP's uncle was studying medicine at the University of Chicago and had decided to hitchhike back home one day. A seemingly nice man pulled over and offered him a ride, and everything seemed fine as he got in the car with both of them heading toward the north of Lincoln Park. But then things got weird. After a while, the man, still smiling and friendly, started driving in the wrong direction. The uncle felt uneasy and asked why they weren't going the right way. That's when the man casually replied, "No, son, you're coming with me." Terrified, OP's uncle decided not to wait around to see what the man meant. Instead, he bided his time. As soon as they stopped at a red light, he unlocked the passenger door and bolted. OP's uncle ran as fast as he could without looking back. A few years later, they found out who the man his uncle had come across really was on TV. It was John Wayne Gacy, the infamous serial killer who had just been arrested for the murder of more than 20 boys and young men. Level 5. Lured a homeless woman to have. A Redditor on the Am I the Devil subreddit recalled the events in his life 10 years ago when he lured a homeless woman into his house just for favors from her. The man, now 43, was going through a bad divorce when he figured the only way to get out of this slump was casually dating and unfortunately, he didn't have much success in that department and was basically going through a really bad dry spell. That is, until he decided to try his luck on Craigslist. Over there, he connected with a homeless woman called Michelle who was essentially just looking for someone to help her. He decided it would be a good idea to emotionally connect with the woman for a bit before inviting her back to his house for a few days. The two eventually met in person, and their little date went just as well as OP had planned. By the end of it, he invited her back to his apartment, offering her a place to stay temporarily. Now, it's important to notice the power dynamic between them. The woman, Michelle, was in no position to refuse OP because she was homeless and unsafe, and any roof over her head was better than none. OP had already started building a sense of control over her with the emotional connection and the successful date. So of course, like any person in her position, Michelle agreed. For the next few days, OP was outwardly very adamant she could stay without needing to pay him back in any way. Outwardly, he framed it as an act of kindness, but his inner thoughts were much darker. I was definitely abusing a power dynamic by trying to create a situation where she was, 1, at my place with no convenient means to leave on her own, and 2, felt obligated to repay my generosity. Michelle tried to repay him by cooking and cleaning, but on the third night, things escalated. She gave in and the two had intercourse. That is when he decided to pull back emotionally, basically giving her the cold shoulder and pushing her to leave as soon as possible. I got a bit colder to her and left for work again that morning. The whole way there, I was cursing my stupidity at being so cold. Michelle picked up on his behavior and assured him she'd leave the next day. Still feeling like she owed him something, the two had intercourse one last time before she finally left. After a few days of texting, they completely lost contact. OP ended his post with a hint of remorse, though it felt particularly hollow. It's something I will hide for the rest of my life out of shame and guilt because I know it was terrible, and it makes me question the kind of person I truly am at my core for having done it. Foot tacos. The idea of someone being totally okay with eating human flesh is, well, let's just say it's a bit unsettling. But in 2018, a Reddit user took to the AMA subreddit to openly brag about doing just that. OP was a motorcyclist who got into a freak accident that left him disabled. He lost a significant chunk of the bone in the middle of his foot, and the rest of it was basically reduced to shrapnel. The doctors told him there was no real recovery possible. He'd have to live the rest of his life on heavy meds and with chronic pain. Not wanting to live that way, OP made a life-changing decision. But amputating his leg wasn't even the wild part. He somehow convinced his doctors to let him keep the amputated leg and then cooked and ate part of it. Apparently, he'd always been curious about trying human meat, and this seemed like the most ethical way to do it. I signed some papers, I got it back, and with the help of some friends, cooked a portion of the tibialis anterior. For OP and his friends, this was just a fun little experience. He didn't seem fazed by it at all. He even described the taste as super beefy with a little fat. According to him, it was like buffalo meat, just a bit chewier. And he didn't stop there. OP was thrilled to share this bizarre detail about his life, posting about it multiple times afterward. He even uploaded pictures of his severed foot and the tacos he made from its meat. Every person for themselves, I guess. Addict's stillbirth. On an old Reddit post where detectives were asked to share their most disturbing cases, one detective recalled an experience that still haunted him to this day. He started his story by mentioning that he was usually given the more shady areas of town with high crime rates and violence. The day that left him completely shaken started with what seemed like a routine call to a bar notorious for shady activities. He was with a female partner that day, and the two were just patrolling around the bar when the latter decided to take a look in the female bathrooms. However, when they went there, the door was locked. After knocking, they heard a woman's voice from inside say, "I'll be out in a minute." But when several minutes passed and no one came out, they knocked again. This time, the woman who emerged from the door was in tight yoga pants with a massive bulge in the back. At first, they assumed she was hiding drugs, that she'd been using the bathroom as a spot to stash or deal. But while their instincts weren't completely off, the reality was far worse than they could have imagined. The woman was caught in the process of giving birth to a deformed stillborn. She had reportedly been drinking and smoking all day, and even through the birth. What the detective shared next was nothing short of chilling. The baby was completely formed, except it never formed a head. It was just sunken in around the neck. I've seen some crazy shit in my career, like brutal, but that one always stands out the most. Arranged crime. While the internet can sometimes feel like a dark and unforgiving place, stories like this one remind us that it can also be used for good. A few years back, a Reddit post made by a boy took the platform by storm. He had recently lost contact with his sister, who his parents claimed had been sent off to boarding school, but his hunch just knew something wasn't right here. The boy started his post by explaining how his family had recently moved from another country after spending most of their lives in America. The move was because his paternal grandfather was seriously ill and needed constant medical care, something his father was willing to give. Adjusting to life in a new country wasn't easy, especially with the language barrier. OP and his little sister struggled at first, but they eventually got the hang of it. What he did notice instantly after moving was how different his sister was being treated by their grandmother. He noticed she was being singled out and treated unfairly compared to him. While he was being spoiled and praised, his little sister couldn't catch a break. She was criticized for everything, even when she did things better than him. Everyone in their vicinity were essentially being hostile towards his sister. Then, one summer, his parents decided to send her to a boarding school during a break, and just like that, all contact with her was cut off. At first, he thought maybe it was just a strict school, but as time went on, things started feeling off. No summer boarding school lasted that long or demanded this level of isolation. His suspicion grew even more when he found his sister's belongings stashed away in their attic. Her clothes, her phone, everything. That's when he realized something wasn't right. There was no way she was at a boarding school. Desperate for answers, he turned to Reddit asking for help. The post gained traction quickly, and thanks to the help of countless kind strangers, he was put in touch with organizations and resources that assist children. As heartbreaking as it sounds, OP's worst fears turned out to be true. His father and grandmother had sold his sister into marriage, disguising it as a summer boarding school. But thanks to the people on Reddit and their guidance, authorities got involved. Both the father and grandmother were arrested, and OP was eventually reunited with his sister. Stalked her since she was 3, she's now 21. Stalking is one of the scariest experiences someone can go through. The constant fear of being watched, running into your stalker, or worrying about your safety is something no one should ever have to deal with. However, this one stalking case takes things to an unforgivable extreme. The Reddit poster sharing the story reveals that she'd been stalked by the same man since she was 3. She's now 24 years old, and the man continues to pester her. She first became aware of his existence when he somehow tracked her in a small-town bar when she was 21. He kept saying weird stuff to her along the lines of, "I finally found you," but she chalked it up to a weird old man flirting and didn't think much of it. She eventually started to notice his presence at the bar more, but again, didn't pay it much mind since there were other regulars too. Then, out of nowhere, the texts started. This man, Gordon, admitted that he'd first seen her 14 years ago and was instantly obsessed. He described meeting her in detail and confessed his love for her over and over. He even begged her to give him a chance. It gets worse. Gordon claimed he'd been in love with her since she was 3. He said he met her back when he was stuck at a bus depot and ended up spending time with her older brother who was babysitting her. According to him, toddler Clara told people at the mall that he was going to be her future husband. That moment apparently started his obsession. Over the years, Gordon sent Clara increasingly disturbing messages rambling about their destiny and how they were connected by fate. At one point, he said he was letting her go, only to text her again 2 days later claiming he couldn't. He even claimed she had visions about their future together. Clara's family is horrified, especially her mom. Despite blocking him on everything, Gordon keeps finding ways to contact her. It's a truly horrifying story. Level 6. Needs a new couch. A few years ago, a Reddit post surfaced in a medical subreddit that ended up becoming one of the most horrific things on the website. The person who posted it was a mental health worker, and they consider this particular case one of the most disturbing experiences they had while working for an emergency medical health unit. It's safe to say it wasn't what they signed up for. While OP wasn't a nurse, they still responded to people in crisis. Anything from thoughts to vague feelings of dissatisfaction with life. One day, on a seemingly normal night shift, OP received a call about an old man who had been drinking heavily. The person who called the emergency mental health unit claimed to be a friend who was regularly bringing this old man his groceries and beer, but that was about it. OP didn't think much of it at first. The man wasn't after all, but something felt off, so they decided to check it out. When OP arrived at the scene, they were greeted by a crowd of anxious faces, including police officers, EMTs, and the beer-buying neighbor. As soon as OP stepped inside the old man's house, the horror hit him. His kitchen was stacked to the brim with bags of rotting food, and the stench of decay and filth was almost palpable. The old man, who had been a heavy drinker for years, was sitting on a couch covered in layers of dried feces. The living room had a similar stench, and it quickly became clear that the man had been neglecting himself for an extended period. OP and the medical team tried to talk to the old man, but he wasn't fully responsive. When he moved, OP realized that his skin, clothes, and the couch had all started to decay together. His body had started necrotizing from sitting in the same spot for too long. The overwhelming stench made it difficult for everyone involved to keep their composure. In the end, OP and the paramedics decided to take the man to the hospital for his safety, though it was clear he had been in that condition for weeks. OP ended the post on a heavy note saying, "The look in his eyes when I asked him if he understood why we were here, hollow, dead, flat eyes with someone screaming behind them. I have no idea how that man could still be alive when he stood up. It looked like half of him had simply rotted off." Don't meet your heroes. This post in the Day in History subreddit recalls the presence and events surrounding one of the most famous Redditors in early Reddit days. It dives into his journey from being an online angel to being arrested as one of the most dangerous people in Reddit's history. Carl Harold was essentially just hailed as a Reddit hero once upon a time, until he wasn't. His story is the definition of never take things at face value. Because what started as a journey of kindness and skill building spiraled into one of the darkest tales in the platform's history. In 2006, Carl joined Reddit as Carl H, and quickly became known as the guy who'd help anyone with programming questions. By 2009, he created the subreddit Carl H Programming, where he helped people and taught programming for free. It wasn't just about code. Carl had this way of making people feel seen and supported. His reputation seemed to grow by the minute, and he ended up making a blog, a YouTube channel, and even earned the coveted title of Redditor of the Day in 2012. The internet adored him. He was that guy who made Reddit better, which wasn't exactly that hard to fathom considering how he even saved a life on another subreddit I'd watch in 2009. For a while, Carl was untouchable. But then, in late 2013, he vanished. No posts, no updates, just radio silence. His fans simply assumed he needed a break from the internet, but unfortunately what they got was a nightmare. In November 2013, Carl and his partner were arrested for crimes so horrific they shook Reddit to its core. His son was among the victims, and Carl went from hero to monster overnight. He was formally charged with 30 counts of abuse and was scheduled to appear in federal court. However, before he could be brought to justice, Carl was found in his cell, dead. He had committed suicide. The story should have ended there, but it didn't. In 2016, someone claiming to be Carl posted on his old subreddit saying he was alive in Russia and planning a comeback. The account went silent when asked for proof. It left Redditors debating whether it was really him or just some sick joke. Carl Harold's rise and fall is a chilling Reddit legend, and a reminder that the person behind the screen isn't always who you think they are. And it's important to be mindful of the people you make your heroes. Level 7. Relationship Advice. A Reddit post by a user named Jason in Hell detailing the infidelity of a man's wife led to one of the most haunting internet-related tragedies ever recorded. Jason Worley was a software engineer who had no choice but to take to Reddit when he caught his wife cheating on him with their neighbor. The post Jason made on the relationship advice subreddit essentially chronicled him being suspicious of his wife because of her constant need to keep her phone locked to her having a full-blown affair with their neighbor. Jason, being a software engineer, was tech-savvy enough to employ a few techniques to catch her red-handed, texting explicit stuff to the neighbor. What initially seemed like a very messy end to a relationship turned borderline psychotic when the wife started to threaten Jason. She told him she was going to take his kids away from him if he filed for divorce. They had a son and daughter aged 7 and 3. So, simply for the sake of his children, Jason tried to make things work with his wife for the next few months. Understandably, he couldn't. This was strengthened by the fact that he caught his wife texting the neighbors several times afterwards. Most of the Redditors on the subreddit went with the tough love approach and told him to leave the woman as fast as he could. They rightfully called her manipulative and abusive and told Jason to take charge of his and his kids' lives. In November 2016, Jason heeded the advice and finally filed for divorce. But tragically, his life took a turn that no one could have seen coming. One morning, he woke up to find that his wife had brutally murdered both of their children. She had stabbed them multiple times before attempting to take her own life. She wasn't able to go through with killing herself, though. The last thing she said to Jason was chilling. "Now, you can't take them away from me." Brandy Worley, his wife, was sentenced to 120 years in prison. She had called 911 to report the crime herself, stating that she'd been taking Benadryl before doing it.
I just myself and my 2 children.
About a year later, Jason posted an update from a different Reddit account. In it, he blamed himself for what happened, but assured everyone that he was doing better. Reddit Survey. On November 13, 2022, 4 University of Idaho students were found brutally to death in their off-campus apartment. At first, this seemed like a typical, though horrific, case. But things took a darker, almost surreal turn when the prime suspect turned out to be someone with a pretty massive digital footprint. The suspect, Brian Koberger, was a criminology PhD student. That detail alone was chilling, but it got worse when people started digging into his online activity. Brian was known for posting some really strange surveys on the internet. At first glance, they seemed like your standard research studies. Things like, you must be 18 or older, and your identity will remain confidential. All very normal. But then these surveys would take a darker twist. The questions started diving into the psychology of criminals and would ask some chillingly specific questions. Did you prepare for the crime before leaving home? Please describe your thoughts and feelings. Or, why did you choose that victim over others? Or the weirdest one, what was the first move you made to accomplish your goal? Please detail any thoughts and feelings at this point. On paper, these surveys were meant for academic purposes, but the very conspiring undertone of the questions made people uneasy. It was almost like Brian wasn't just researching criminals, but trying to figure out how to pull off the perfect crime himself. While they were explicitly aimed towards all sorts of crimes, some of these questions clearly hinted toward the more violent ones, like taking a life. And if you think about the nature of the crime he's accused of, it's not hard to figure out the rest. Brian allegedly entered the student's house in the middle of the night and all 4 of them to death. At first, there wasn't much evidence pointing directly to him, but investigators found male DNA on a knife sheath left on one of the victims' beds, which they eventually traced back to Brian through a relative's genetic data. He was also reportedly seen near the victim's house the night of the murder, with his car parked nearby. While Brian hasn't been officially convicted yet, the evidence against him keeps piling up.
We do not have a suspect at this time, and that individual is still out there.
There's also been a lot of chatter about Brian's alleged Reddit accounts. While nothing has been confirmed, one thing's clear. He spent a lot of time on the internet soaking up information, and maybe even dropping some of his own bizarre thoughts here and there. His next hearing is set to be on August 11th, 2025 in Boise, Idaho. Confession of a Seller. The Confession subreddit is honestly a goldmine of the weirdest, most unfortunate things people can admit to. It's like a rabbit hole that only gets stranger the more you scroll. But sometimes these confessions cross a line from weird and awkward to outright disturbing. One such post was titled, "I am responsible for the death of several people." It came from a seller who, in a tragic mistake, ended up causing multiple overdoses. He confused his stash of fentanyl for mescaline and sold it to several buyers. By the time he realized what he'd done, it was already too late. Several people had died thinking they were taking mescaline. The post started with a guy explaining how he was just a vendor trying to build a future for himself. His plan was to sell enough to fund a business one day. Once he had the money, he started his own store. "I started my store with 3 ketamine, meth, and some outdoor weed my buddy was getting for super cheap. Business started booming and his connections grew. Eventually, he found a supplier who sold him all kinds of including mescaline, LSD, mushrooms, and fentanyl. Things were going great for him, or so it seemed. He managed his orders using a spreadsheet where he kept track of buyers, orders, zip codes, and all that. But like with anything digital, mistakes happen, and one mistake turned out to be catastrophic. At some point, he messed up the spreadsheet and accidentally sent out fentanyl instead of mescaline. At the time, I was selling some super white powdered mescaline. The fentanyl was also a white powder, very similar consistency. A few days later, someone called him to say their close friend had died after taking what they thought was mescaline. At first, he couldn't believe it, but the more he looked into it, the more he realized what he had done. The market I was on also had a feature to see the user's last activity, and none of them had logged in for at least 3 days, most 2 days. The weight of the situation hit him hard. In a panic, he shut down all his accounts, sold everything related to his business, and moved to a different city, leaving that life behind, but the guilt didn't leave him. I still think about them. Every night, I saved their names and Googled them a few days later. I was able to find info on 4 customers that definitely died. It's tragic that it took something of this horrific magnitude for him to turn his life around. God made him do it. Worthless31 was a user on Reddit who gained notoriety for posting some of the most deranged things on the platform. Reddit is a cesspool of weird and unhinged, but Worthless31 managed to push things to a whole other level. At first, they came across as a tormented soul with an almost painful level of intellectual awareness, a classic case of someone who overthinks everything to the point of self-destruction. But the more they posted, the clearer it became that something much darker was going on. They seemed pretty obsessed with the idea of religion and divinity, and often wrote about their attempts to study faith in a way that felt, honestly, kind of off. But things really took a nosedive when they started sharing some of their more personal beliefs. In one post, they talked about wanting to their own genitals as a show of faith. Naturally, people were divided over it. Some thought it was an obvious troll post, while others were genuinely concerned and urged them to seek help. Then, out of nowhere, they posted a very cryptic question on the subreddit Surgery titled, "How long does local anesthesia last?" One concerned Redditor implored them to go to a hospital instead of the internet for something so serious. That's when they revealed the unthinkable. They had actually themselves by shooting their genitals off. All throughout their remaining posts, they doubled down on the horrific details. They talked about the excruciating pain they endured, described the entire experience, and even claimed it was something God had instructed them to do. Unfortunately, it doesn't end there and gets far more grim afterwards. Not only had Worthless 31 mutilated themselves, they had also cooked and eaten their own genitals. For them, this wasn't just an act of self-destruction. It was a form of what they called divine enlightenment and their way of serving God. They continued to post about their experiences and hinted that there were even more acts of self-harm they hadn't revealed. Some users claimed there were graphic photos circulating that showed the aftermath of what they'd done. While it's been a long time since Worthless 31 posted anything, their story is a reminder of how much pain and mental illness can go unnoticed online. It's easy to dismiss people as trolls or attention seekers, but sometimes they're just deeply broken individuals who need help. In this case, it's clear that Worthless 31 was battling something far beyond what any Reddit thread could fix. Hopefully, wherever they are now, they found some kind of peace or the help they desperately needed.